At around 1 a.m. on October 20th, 2025, staff at a 24-hour restaurant in the city of Guri, South Korea, heard a disturbance outside. When one of the employees went to check it out, his heart nearly stopped. A middle-aged man was being beaten by a group of men who looked to be in their 20s. The restaurant manager tried to call the police, but one of the perpetrators took his phone. But eventually, the police were called. The men involved were questioned and let go at the scene, but the victim, Kim Chang-min, was taken to the police station. When officers tried to question him, he just sat there in a daze, staring blankly, unable to respond. And within days, he would be dead. This is the story of Kim Chang-min. On November 7th, 2025, South Korea's indie film community received devastating news. A director named Kim Chang-min had passed away at just 40 years old. Initially, the story came and went without much national attention. Kim Chang-min wasn't a household name, and most people had never heard of his films. But then on March 31st, 2026, everything changed. His family came forward with information that reframed the entire story. Kim Chang-min hadn't just died, he had been beaten to death. The revelation spread like wildfire across Korean media. People were outraged. And then, almost as to pour gasoline on the fire, a video surfaced online, featuring a man claiming to be one of the attackers, offering what appeared to be an apology, followed bizarrely by the release of a hip-hop track. So, what actually happened? Before we get into the incident, let's talk about Kim Chang-min. He was a South Korean indie film director who started drawing attention after directing a series of short films centered on different social issues. People who were familiar with his work described his style as unfiltered and real. Kim debuted in 2016 with Someone's Daughter, and went on to make several socially conscious films, of which Exit 3 of Guri Station was the most celebrated. The 27-minute film follows a couple on the verge of divorce who cross paths by chance at Guri Station and spend the day wandering the streets, quietly taking stock of their feelings. It won the Best Director at the Police Human Rights Film Festival. A note of painful irony given how police would later handle his death. Alongside his directing work, Kim contributed to the art departments of some of Korea's most notable films, including The Drug King, The Witch, Part 1, The Subversion, Waiting for Rain, and The Firefighters. He may not have been famous, but he was deeply respected by those who knew him and his work. And he was also a father. Chang-min's adult son is on the autism spectrum and struggles both with communication and understanding certain situations. As his sole caregiver, Chang-min naturally felt the need to protect his son. On the night of the incident, Chang-min's son communicated that he wanted to go out for pork cutlets. It was late, but Chang-min agreed, and the two of them headed out to a 24-hour restaurant in the Suttaek-dong neighborhood of Guri. They sat together as they waited for their food. But before long, the mood in the restaurant shifted. A group of men in their 20s and 30s started complaining that Chang-min's son was making strange noises and bothering them. There's a detail about that night that hasn't gotten enough attention. When Chang-min and his son walked in, the group of 6 was already there, already drinking, already loud. It was their noise that unsettled Chang-min's son, causing him to grow anxious and begin making sounds of his own. Only then did the group turn on Chang-min, demanding he keep his son quiet. Chang-min bowed his head and apologized. He asked politely if they could lower their voices. The atmosphere immediately turned dangerous. What started as a verbal confrontation escalated quickly. One of the men called Chang-min outside to talk it over a cigarette, so they stepped out, and CCTV captured him smoking with the group in front of the restaurant. It seemed he was trying to defuse the situation. But when Chang-min went back inside, the tension flared again. At one point, he grabbed something from a table and lunged at the group. He was immediately restrained. It's worth pausing here because what he grabbed matters. A restaurant employee told police it was a pork cutlet knife, testimony that became the cornerstone of the mutual assault classification. But the CCTV only shows him picking up something from the table. It doesn't confirm what it was, and it doesn't show him swinging or using it. Some who watched the unedited footage have disputed the knife claim entirely. What is not in dispute is that he was restrained within seconds, and that whatever he was holding, he never had the chance to use it. What happened next was anything but mutual. Chang-min was outnumbered 6-1. One of the men slipped behind him and locked him in a chokehold, causing Chang-min to lose consciousness on the floor of the restaurant in full view of his son. The group then dragged his limp body outside, around a corner into an alley tucked away from the CCTV, and continued to beat him long after he had stopped moving. Witnesses said some of the attackers were laughing. When emergency services arrived, they gave Chang-min some basic, on-the-spot treatment, but instead of taking him to a hospital, he was brought to the police station for questioning. He was the only person who was not released on the spot. There, when officers tried to ask him what had happened, Chang-min couldn't respond. He just stared blankly. Eventually, the police called his father to the station. When he walked in and saw Chang-min, face covered in bruises, eyes vacant, completely unresponsive, his heart broke. He asked the officers what had happened, and they told him there had been a fight at a restaurant. That was it. No urgency, no alarm. Just a fight. But something was very clearly wrong. Chang-min's father took him out of the station immediately to get him medical attention. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Chang-min had suffered severe blunt force trauma to his upper body. But there was worse news. He had also sustained critical brain damage. He was rushed into intensive care and placed on life support. Meanwhile, police had officially classified the incident as mutual assault, pointing to the moment Chang-min had lunged at the group inside the restaurant as grounds for treating him as a suspect. They identified one of the attackers, a man known publicly by the surname Lee, and filed for an arrest warrant. Prosecutors returned the request, saying the investigation hadn't been thorough enough. But before anything else could happen, the case took a turn. Kim Chang-min was officially declared brain dead just over 2 weeks following the attack. He was gone. Chang-min's family made the decision to donate his organs, saving the lives of 4 people. But with his passing, the police quietly closed his side of the mutual assault case, citing the death of the suspect. His family, naturally, was not at all satisfied with this outcome. Chang-min had gone out for dinner and ended up with injuries so severe they eventually killed him. So how could the case be closed with no one being held responsible? They went back to the police and pushed hard for reinvestigation. They argued that what had been classified as a brawl was in fact a fatal assault. But they didn't stop at that. They went out and personally gathered additional CCTV footage from the surrounding area. Footage the police hadn't even bothered to collect. And what they saw made everything undeniable. Chang-min's initial lunge at the group was the only aggressive action he took throughout the whole ordeal. The family handed the footage over to the police. It wasn't until late December 2025, more than 2 months after the attack, that the police finally re-examined the footage, interviewed additional witnesses, and identified a second suspect, a man surnamed Lim. As for Lim, he was the man who physically dragged Chang-min's unconscious body out the door. Despite CCTV showing him applying a chokehold and hauling Chang-min into the alley, police took the attacker's word that he'd been trying to break up the fight and didn't charge him at all. He was only added as a suspect months later, after the case drew national attention. And only then were Lee and Lim placed under a travel ban. For 70 days after the attack, either of them could have easily fled the country. The case faced more roadblocks. In February and March of 2026, police filed 4 additional arrest warrant requests for Lee and Lim on charges of causing death by injury. And prosecutors returned 3 of them for further investigation. The court rejected the other, stating that both men had fixed addresses and were therefore unlikely to flee or destroy evidence. So both suspects were referred to the prosecution without detention, meaning they were still free. As the warrant rejections piled up, the perpetrators' behavior reportedly grew bolder. They moved around freely, justified the assault in conversations, and treated the whole situation as a non-event. One person said one of them had told people in his circle that his fists hadn't rusted. The full details of Chang-min's death weren't widely known until March 31st, 2026, when his family decided to take the story to the press and tell the world that he had been beaten to death. From there, the story went viral almost overnight. People were furious. The internet lit up with what ifs. What if the suspect decided to go after the family next? What if the men responsible tried to run? What if the true story had never made it into the news at all? While the legal process crawled forward, people online started doing their own digging. Netizens tried to identify the attackers from CCTV footage that had spread online, and 2 names began circulating. However, a JTBC investigative program called Crime Chief, which had helped bring the story to a wide television audience, later confirmed that one of those people wasn't an attacker at all. He was actually someone who had tried to intervene and help Chang-min during the assault. And the theories continued spreading online. One popular claim was that the attackers were connected to a local organized crime group in Guri. The group came forward and clarified that while they knew the suspects, the men were not members of their organization. People claiming to know the attackers said one was a personal trainer and the other ran a delivery business. There were even reports that one of them had been spotted exercising at a gym and going for runs, living life completely normally, as if none of it had ever happened. On April 7th, 2026, Minister of Justice Chung Sung-ho publicly addressed the case, promising that justice would be served. He confirmed that after the Guri police station forwarded the case to the prosecutors on April 2nd, they had quickly assembled a dedicated investigative team to carry out a thorough supplementary investigation. He acknowledged how long and painful the wait had been for Chang-min's family. They had lost someone who, by all accounts, was one of the warmest people in their lives. Just 2 days later, a YouTube channel called Caracula Detective Agency posted a video that brought even more attention to the case. The channel's host, Caracula, had tracked down and interviewed the man identified as Lee. The video was titled, "I Am the Killer of Director Kim Chang-min." In the video, Lee faced the camera and offered an apology, saying, "I understand the grief of losing a son, and I have no words but apologies. I am so sorry." He didn't say much beyond that. He deflected most of Caracula's questions, offering little more than apologies to the bereaved family. The rest of the video featured Caracula speaking with other people who had been present that night. The online reaction was less than positive, and it only got worse when people found out that roughly 4 months after Chang-min's death, Lee had released a hip-hop track called Thug. And the timing felt deeply offensive to most people. Lyrics from the song included lines like, "The innocence in me is already gone," and "I've become a thug." Lee defended himself by saying the song had been in works for a year before the incident and claiming it was actually about his first love. If the lyrics weren't enough, he also released the track under the rap name Pomin, which can be loosely translated to mean tiger person, but more commonly means criminal. And Lee insisted again that he intended for the name to refer to a tiger, but the Korean public wasn't buying it. On April 15th, 2026, people took to the streets, The Korean Parents Network for People with Disabilities organized a protest in front of the Korean National Police Agency headquarters in Seoul, calling for a proper investigation, disciplinary action against the Guri police officials for their poor handling of the case, and a formal apology from the state and the National Police Agency. Reports differ on the number of participants, but somewhere between 150 and 300 people showed up, dressed in white t-shirts with Kim Chang-min's face printed on them. And they performed ochetuji, a kind of Buddhist prostration as a gesture of solidarity with his family and grief for what had been lost. In the same morning, investigators from the prosecutor's office raided Lee's home, seizing his cell phone and other belongings. And the goal was to examine their communications before and after the incident to determine whether Lee and his accomplices had shown any genuine remorse, or whether something else had been going on behind the scenes. So as of now, the case remains ongoing. People across South Korea continue to watch it closely, hoping for justice. But there is a palpable sense of frustration. For 5 months, Chang-min's family had to struggle, securing their own CCTV footage, demanding a reinvestigation. Watching as warrant after warrant failed, none of it really pushed the case forward. It took the story going viral for the state to actually respond. Within 2 days of the public outrage, prosecutors took over the case. Within a week, the justice minister was weighing in. Within 2 weeks, investigators were searching Lee's home. And that raises a very uncomfortable question. What happens to cases like this when they don't go viral at all? The latest update in this case is that on May 4th, 2026, 6 months after the attack, Lee and Lim were finally taken into custody. After 7 rejected warrant requests, a court issued the arrest warrant citing flight risk and possible destruction of evidence, the exact concerns every previous court had dismissed. When the 2 men arrived for their hearing that morning, reporters asked if they had anything to say to the bereaved family. They said nothing. They lowered their heads. They were charged with causing death by assault and violating the act of welfare of persons with disabilities. The latter a direct acknowledgement that the beating caused Chang-min's son severe psychological harm. Prosecutors also revealed they had secured phone recordings, in which the suspects made statements implying they had intended to kill, and found evidence the 2 men had tried to coordinate their stories afterwards. And there is the additional, less-mentioned tragedy regarding Chang-min's son. As his father was being beaten, he stood there terrified, covering his ears and screaming. When Chang-min was choked unconscious and dragged toward the alley, out of the CCTV's range, his son could only watch as his father disappeared into the darkness. He had no way to intervene, no way to call for help. Today, Chang-min's son cannot get through a single day without medication. The image of his father being beaten stays with him. It surfaces constantly. Without the medication, he cannot manage it. Now his sole caretaker is gone. His grandfather, who is currently caring for him, has noted that this once happy young man now screams and feels anxious. And as of yet, no one has told him that his father is never coming home. The family just felt he wouldn't be able to process it. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.